غرباء وارتضيناها شعارا للحياة إن تسل عنا فإنا لا نبالي بالطغاة نحن جند الله دوما دربنا درب الأباه
قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بدأ الإسلام غريبا وسيعود غريبا كما بدأ فطوبى للغرباء.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا مزيدا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. In trying to get a better understanding of victory in matters pertaining to it, I gave a short introduction on the topic last halaqah. Then I began to mention the story of the dwellers of the town that's mentioned in Surah Yasin. It's a town where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent two messengers. The people rejected them, they doubted them, and they slandered them. So Allah reinforced them with a third. And that's when they threatened them with stoning or a severe punishment. And that's where we stopped. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. From the remotest, furthest end of the city, a man came running. He said, "O my people, follow the messengers." Rajul. Some Mufassirin stated that his name is Habib al-Najjar or Skafa and other names. And some Mufassirin went further to mention various opinions pertaining to his profession, and that he gave half his wealth in charity and half his wealth to feed his family, and that he was ill. Those details don't really matter, as I stated in the last halaqah. Harping over the name of the stranger or the town where he's from, where the events took place, is not needed for the straightforward, clear story. As-Sa'di rahimahullah said in his tafsir, or actually As-Sa'di rahimahullah in his tafsir on this verse stuck to what was clear in the verse, and he didn't dwell into opinions on the names or details of the stranger as many other tafsir did. Rahimahumullah jami'an. We have no hints if this stranger was a leader or prominent figure among his people or his tribe who could afford him protection in his daring move. But we do know that the people of Tawheed don't make their own protection a main concern when conveying Tawheed, especially not role models that are mentioned in the Quran. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الَّذِينَ يُبَلِّغُونَ رِسَالَاتِ اللَّهِ وَيَخْشَوْنَهُ وَلَا يَخْشَوْنَ أَحَدًا إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَيَخْشَوْنَهُ وَلَا يَخْشَوْنَ أَحَدًا إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Those who convey the message of Allah and fear Him and never fear anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Aqeedah and Tawheed become part of a muwahid, it illuminates the path and appears on the limbs, speech, and actions. People who are moved by a belief don't mope around their bedrooms with it. You see those who hold the most repulsive beliefs or desires that have no share in the akhirah and no dignity in this dunya, they come out and sacrifice their time and wealth and freedom and everything they have to stand up for their beliefs or desires. And then a person promised a Jannah as vast as the heavens and the earth deserts the most noble task of da'wah. The stranger of Al Yasin was ecstatic at being a muwahhid that he came out sprinting in support of Tawheed and Muwahhideen. He wanted everyone to join. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored his mention for his stance in defending Tawheed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even honored animals with their mention in the noble Quran because they carried this noble task. The Hupao, who saw shirk and his ghira over Tawheed wouldn't allow him to remain silent even if it put his life at stake. أَلَّا يَسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ الَّذِي يُخْرِجُ الْخَبَأَ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَيَعْلَمُ مَا تُخْفُونَ وَمَا تُعْلِنُونَ. He told Sulaiman alayhi salam, they're doing shirk. Shouldn't they be prostrated to Allah? أَلَّا يَسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ, Tawheed. And then those worse than cattle who lack ghira over tawheed, diminish aspects of tawheed to please tawaghit, then sniffle and say they're strangers on tawheed. The stranger of Al Yasin made tawheed his mission and gave it precedent over his life, wealth, family, freedom, everything he had. Once a person presents himself to tawheed in da'wah, and in particular da'wah to the pure tawheed, he or she becomes an automatic target. Target by who? By nearly everybody. Kuffar, their intelligence, the modernists, the slanderers, the murji'ah, the mumayyi'ah, the plain masses of the juhal, and that's what makes them ghuraba. And ghuraba don't make their own safety and peace a priority or an ultimate goal when it comes to da'wah or the obedience of Allah. The Quran tells us he came running from the furthest part of the town. If his safety was his ultimate goal, he would have stayed back with his wife and kids. No one forced him to go out running and put himself at harm's way. If the ghuraba are safe after their da'wah, then it's a blessing. And they thank Allah for it. Alhamdulillah. And if they're afflicted as a result, then it's a trial. They need to remain steadfast and thank Allah for it as well. وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى. I'm trying my best in this series not to drift off to side issues. But there's a detail here that shows the eloquency of the Quran. And it actually does help the huffaz who mix up these two verses. Pay attention to how they're mentioned so you can understand. وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. This is in Surah Yasin about a man who came to support three strangers. From the farthest end of the city, a man came rushing and running. Surah Yasin, verse 20. وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ. From the furthest part of the city, so the city, then the man is mentioned. But if you read Surah Al-Qasas, and subhanallah, it's verse 20 in Surah Al-Qasas as well, it's a totally different story where a man came rushing to warn Musa that there's a conspiracy to kill him. And he's referred to as Mu'min al-Fir'aun, the believer of al-Fir'aun. The verses start off very similar. وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا مُوسَى إِنَّ الْمَلَأَ يَأْتَمِرُونَ بِكَ لِيَقْتُلُوكَ فَاخْرُجْ إِنِّي لَكَ مِنَ النَّاصِحِينَ. A man from the farthest part of the city came running. He said, Musa, the authorities are considering to kill you, so you better leave. وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ. A man, then the furthest part of the city. So in Surah Yasin, verse 20, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ. From the farthest end of the city, a man came rushing and running. In Surah Al-Qasas, verse 20, وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ. A man came running from the farthest end of the city. Let me say them in English alone so you see the difference. Surah Yasin, verse 20, from the farthest end of the city, a man came running. Surah Al-Qasas, verse 20, a man came running from the farthest end of the city. Let's start off with the one in Surah Al-Qasas, the believer of Al-Fir'aun. A man came running from the farthest end of the city to warn Musa. That's the proper grammatical, mainstream Arabic way to say it. A man came running from the farthest end of the city. That's the proper linguistic way to mention it. A man is referred to as fa'al, and that comes first, and after that the fi'al, which is what happened, and it's rushing from the furthest end of the city. Grammatically, that's the ideal, general, mainstream way to mention it, unless there's a special reason or a unique reason, like rhetoric, eloquency, balagha, which we call balagha, or some other type of reason. So that's why it's mentioned like that in Surah Al-Qasas. There's no special need or exception to put it any other way in Surah Al-Qasas. The man came from the farthest end of the city to warn Musa alayhi salam that they're conspiring to kill him. And that's where it's expected this type of news would come from. Why? Because Fir'aun and his close henchmen lived in the outskirts and furthest point of the town. So the news of a conspiracy like that would normally come from the outskirts or remote part of the town where Fir'aun lived and conspired. So there's nothing special or unique or unusual about where the man came from. Ibn Ashur, rahimahullah, in his tafsir said, it appears Fir'aun's palace was in the outskirts as kings did back then so that they can easily flee if there was ever a revolution or a coup. So it comes in the standard Arabic way, as there's no need to change it around because there's nothing special or unusual about the news coming from the outskirts where Fir'aun lived. Now in Surah Yasin it's flipped around. From the farthest end of the city, a man came running. The fi'l, then the fa'al. وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ. Why did he mention from the farthest end of the city first here? It's flipped around, and that's from the balagh of the Quran to indicate there's something unique about where the stranger came from. Meaning, pay attention to this. It goes to draw attention to the fact that the message of the three messengers was fulfilled and that it yielded its fruit by reaching the furthest point of the city. And that indicates that the messengers were successful in their da'wah because it reached everywhere. Now, acceptance is from Allah, but it reached everywhere, even with all the hostility that they faced. If the message reached the remotest part of the town, where this man came from, then it implies that their da'wah was so successful, it echoed everywhere. In the believer of Al-Fir'aun, the verse of Surah Al-Qasas, it was expected that he come from the remotest part of the city, and where the conspiracy took place. It was expected that he come from there. But here, the stranger of Al-Yasin, it was expected he come from the center of the city, where the da'wah was most likely taking place, but rather he came from the outskirts of the city, which indicates da'wah reached everywhere. It also goes to highlight the purity and fitrah of the outskirts, which generally speaking is more than that in the center and heart of the city. Because the people in the heart of the city are usually influenced by the leaders. The leaders here called the messengers liars and bad omens and threatened them. People tend to be influenced by each other when they're close to each other, or by the leaders because they're near them or attached to them, or maybe they fear them, unlike the outskirts, which they're slightly more independent and less affected by those leaders. It also goes to hint and indicate that coming from the remotest part of the city, the messengers didn't know this stranger, and that it wasn't a staged act between them, since he was from the outskirts and they were most likely in the heart of the city conducting their da'wah. So those are some special details that come from the balagha of the Quran in merely mentioning the outskirts before the man in Surah Yasin. وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described both the believer of Al-Fir'aun and the stranger of Al-Yasin as men. But for now we're concerned with the stranger of Al-Yasin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ. From the furthest end of the city, a man came rushing. A man. He didn't say a male. In Arabic, a male is dhakar. But Allah said a man, rajulun. Allah honored him as being a man, which means he possesses the characteristics which exemplify this quality, a testimony from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his manhood. He's a man, and that's different than him being described as a male. Every man is a male, but not every male is a man. When filling out forms, everyone can check the mailbox. Every man is a male, but not every male is a man. Manhood is attained through belief, stance, character, and action. Manhood is characteristics and not physical body parts. Tawheed needs men to carry it, not males. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another verse, actually in two verses in the Quran, one in Yusuf and one in Surah Al-Nahl, Allah said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن قَبْلِكَ إِلَّا رِجَالًا نُوحِي إِلَيْهِمْ. We only sent before you, O Prophet of Allah, men. Messengers are described as men here because they come with the most noble qualities such as tawheed, submission, salah, sacrifice, jihad, da'wah, manners. And in the specific verse, of course, it also goes to show that they're men as opposed to women, because all the messengers and prophets of Allah are men. When Bani Israel were ordered to enter the Holy Land, and Allah promised them victory if they did enter, they told Musa, you and your Lord go and fight, we'll be sitting here waiting for you. Two men stood to convince and admonish the rest. What did Allah refer to them as? قال رجلان. He didn't say ذكران. قال رجلان من الذين يخافون أنعم الله عليهما ادخلوا عليهم الباب. Two men who fear Allah and who had been blessed by Allah said, surprise them and enter the gate. If you do enter the gate, you're certainly going to be victorious. And put your trust on Allah if you're believers. Men, because they feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and were willing to submit blindly to the commands of Allah, even if it meant risking their lives, and to admonish others and to guide them to the right path. In Surah At-Tawbah, لا تقم فيه أبدا لمسجد أسس على التقوى من أول يوم أحق أن تقوم فيه رجال يحبون أن يتطهروا والله يحب المطهرين. A mosque that's founded on righteousness from the first day is more worthy of your prayers. In the mosque are men who love to be purified. يحبون أن يتطهروا. Allah loves those who purify themselves. They're praiseworthy because they're people of the masajid who love to be purified, and so they were worthy to be praised as men. Another verse. رجال لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة يخافون يوما تتقلب فيه القلوب والأبصار. Allah said they're men. Why are they men? Because they don't let buying and selling distract them from Allah's remembrance or from prayer or from paying their alms, and they fear a day that the hearts and eyes will tremble in it. The verse I mentioned several halaqat ago, which is about Sahaba in general, and those of course who follow in their footsteps. But I mentioned it pertaining to those who attended the pledge at the very end of the talk on the pledge. I said the verse of Allah, مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. Among the believers are men. What made them men? They're true to what they pledged to Allah. Some of them fulfilled their pledge and passed away, while others are waiting. They never changed. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. They never changed their commitment in the least. It takes real men not to change and take detours in difficult times. When the situation becomes difficult, only true men of Tawheed are able to step up and handle the situation. In Arabic, manhood could also be used as a wasf, meaning the term itself can be used as a reference to describe great positive qualities. With that in mind, and in such context, when it's used as a wasf, the praise would include women just as it includes men. For example, the two women who attended the pledge, we mentioned something about their lives and their names. They would be included in a praise like مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ, just like men. The stranger of Al Yasin was referred to as a man by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah described him as a man in praise for standing and defending Tawheed. And that praise follows any man or woman who follows in his footsteps. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort, inconvenience, and victory. Everyone jumps on the bandwagon then. The ultimate measure of a man on Tawheed is where he stands while he's a stranger. He was a man, a stranger of Al Yasin, with his mighty Imanic stance, defending Tawheed. And men are known by their actions, not by their ages, nor their looks. A man, because he had the passion and felt the sense of responsibility to defend Tawheed. A man with firm tawheed, nurtured by sound upbringing and developed by good example. Belief in tawheed combined with being brave, honest, good conduct, great manners, standing up for tawheed, living on tawheed, dying upon tawheed. That's what true manhood is all about, like this man of Surah Yasin. The one who credited him as being a man for his tawheedic stance is the one who knows him more than anyone knows him, more than he himself knows his own self. By saying a man, it also gives another indication that he was some random man, not known to the messengers, and it was not a staged act between the messengers and the strangers, similar to what I mentioned when I explained the balagha pertaining to from the remotest part of the town a man came. He came from Aqsa al-Madinah to place himself like a shield between the messengers and the disbelievers, the dwellers of the town. People who take such stands during difficult times are strangers, and they're always in a win-win situation. It may cost them their honor, their life, their wealth, and all their dunya, which is a ni'mah and a gift given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they use that ni'mah to strike a bargain that can never fail. The reimbursement is Jannah, the ultimate triumph. The victory to those who give victory to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth is imminent without a doubt. The timing is not up to me and you. It's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doubting that victory is doubting the words and promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some recline back in comfort, watching and waiting if victory comes during their lifetime, while others honor themselves by being participants, like the stranger of Al-Yasin. They're not the same. In Surah Al-Hadid, Allah said pertaining to the Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum, لا يستوي منكم من أنفق من قبل الفتح وقاتل. Those who spent their wealth and donated and took part in fighting before the victory are unparalleled. The victory meaning either the victory of Sulh al-Hudaybiyah or the conquest of Mecca. The scholars dispute which one it is. They cannot be equated with those who spent their wealth and took part in fighting afterwards. Meaning, the Sahaba who gave during the phase of being strangers while they were oppressed and helpless cannot be equated with those who gave after the victory. But Al-Kareem, the generous, said, وَكُلًّا وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الْحُسْنَى. And Allah promised both a fine reward. Both of them will get their share reward, their fair reward. The stranger of Al-Yasin didn't say 3 messengers were sent by Allah. They were rejected. What can I possibly accomplish? I'll believe and stay back safely at home. I'll worship until I die safely at home. Or I'll wait for the news of the victory to come. Then I'll go rushing and running into town. He went running and rushing and sprinting as a stranger saying, Ya qawm, oh my people. His speech shows compassion and mercy with the hope that they believe, because he only wanted what's good for them. As firm and as eager as he was to support Tawheed, it may even seem that he was angry and anxious because of their rejection and hostility towards the message and the messengers, but he maintained his manners and his actions, and he was affectionate in his speech all throughout his da'wah, and even after they killed him, as we'll see later on inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, yas'a. He went rushing, running, sprinting. The word yas'a is a lesson for the strangers to give all their effort in conveying tawheed and supporting muwahhideen, following in the footsteps of this man. In matters of dunya, you'll find the Quran saying, famshu, walk. Do it, yeah, but take it easy. هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. In Surah Al-Mulk, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He is the one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who made this earth subservient to you. فامشوا في مناكبها. So walk in the path and eat from His provision. Matters of the akhirah, فاسعوا. In the terms like فاسعوا, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع in Surah Al-Jum'ah. When the call for Jum'ah Salah is proclaimed on Friday, then hasten, hurry, فاسعوا to the remembrance of Allah and leave off business. In Surah Al Imran, وسارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة عرضها السماوات والأرض أعدت للمتقين. Hasten, race, hurry, sprint to the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah Al-Dhariyat, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنِّي لَكُم مِّنْهُ نَذِيرٌ مُبِينٌ. Run to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hasten, flee quickly, turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise, the verse of the man who is the believer of Al-Fir'aun, يَسْعَى. In the verse in Surah Yasin about the stranger, يَسْعَى. They're both يَسْعَى. The Quran is consistent. Matters of dunya, the terminology is famshu, walk. Matters of the akhirah, hasten, hurry, run, sprint. Here the man came running to support Tawheed and the messengers of Tawheed. He said, "O my people, follow the messengers. اتبعوا المرسلين." I want to pause here for a second. اتبعوا المرسلين. The stranger said, "Follow me." He said, "Follow the messengers." He was directing people to follow the messengers. He wasn't trying to advertise or sell himself on the account of da'wah like the buffoons of da'wah do today. This da'wah isn't about me and you. Our goal isn't to call people to ourselves or to make a name for ourselves or to gain vanishing followers or wealth or fame or luxuries of life or women. When Umar radiallahu anh sent his men to Nahawand around 21 years after the Hijrah to conquer Persia, he was eagerly awaiting the news like a father awaits the news of the delivery of his newborn baby. The hadith says, كان يدعو الله وينتظر مثل صيحة الحبلى. Back in the days, the woman would be in a room delivering the baby, while the father would be in another room or another area, eagerly and anxiously awaiting for one of the women to shout out the glad tidings of the newborn baby, boy or girl. The hadith is saying Umar radiallahu anh was making dua, anxious and apprehensive like a father awaiting the shout of the delivery of the newborn. Before the battle, he appointed An-Nu'man ibn Muqarrin al-Muzani. An-Nu'man radiallahu anh made a dua right before the battle after advising and organizing his troops. He said, Allahumma inni as'aluka an taqarra ayni bifathin yakunu fihi izzul islami wa ahlih wa dhullul kufri wa ahlih. He said, "Oh Allah, delight my eyes today with the victory of Islam and its people and humiliate kufr and its people, and then accept me in this battle as a martyr." And it happened exactly as he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The soldiers then gave the pledge to Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman radiallahu anh to be their general. And because Hudayfa knew how worried and anxious Umar was, he immediately sent a messenger to Umar radiallahu anh to inform him of the victory. When the messenger reached Umar radiallahu anh, he said, "Abshir ya Amir al-Mu'mineen bifathin a'azza Allahu fihi al-Islam wa ahlah wa adhalla fihi al-shirka wa ahlah." O leader of the Muslims, I'm giving you the glad tidings of the great conquest in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored Islam and its people and humiliated shirk and its people. Umar radiallahu anh told the messenger, "And Nu'man sent you?" The messenger said, "Oh no, leader of the Muslims, be patient and seek reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." And Nu'man was killed radiallahu anh. Umar radiallahu anh began to cry and he said, "Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un." Who else was killed? The messenger mentioned a list of men that Umar knew. Then he said, "O Amir al-Mu'mineen, the rest you don't know." Umar radiallahu anh began to weep even more. And he said, لا يضرهم أن لا يعرفهم عمر لكن الله يعرفهم. لا يضرهم أن لا يعرفهم عمر لكن الله يعرفهم. It doesn't hurt or harm them that Umar doesn't know them. Allah surely knows them. How many were killed in the path of Allah with their own possibly immediate relatives not knowing, let alone anyone else? And how many forgotten captives do we have? Some who nobody knows about, and others who nobody seriously calls for their release. How many brothers and sisters secretly work behind the scene to uplift Tawheed and Muwahideen? If you're given da'wah and you're spreading the message in an anonymous method, or you're doing something benefiting and uplifting to this ummah, and you aid and give victory to Islam and Muslims, and you do so without recognition, don't think it harms you. It doesn't harm you that no one recognizes you. What matters is like what Umar radiallahu anh said. Allah knows, and you're trying to please Allah. Umar radiallahu anhu's statement expressed a principle that he learned from the many various ahadith and ayat taught to him firsthand by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This pure manhaj needs pure men and women who don't seek recognition and fame in this dunya. This pure tawheed needs pure muwahideen who don't aim to make a name for themselves through their da'wah and ibadah in all its various forms. This tawheed needs muwahideen who feel the exact same way when they're praised or disparaged. So long as they know they're pleasing Allah, who cares? This stranger of Al Yasin's actions and sacrifice were so noble, so worthy to be in the Quran, to remain so long as days and nights alternate. Yet the name and identity were omitted from the Quranic story. Ghuraba stand behind efforts and accomplishments and victories unknown on this earth, but known by the one who not a leaf falls, but he knows it, and not a crawling ant except that he hears it. The ultimate honor in what matters to a stranger is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises and boasts of him to the angels. He or she accept being a stranger on this earth because they're very famous and popular with Allah and the angels where it really matters. And that's why he said, ittabi'ul mursaleen, follow the messengers. He didn't say follow me. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.